"Sir, your hands are bleeding." Yolanda Pierce didn't think twice before she knelt down on the cracked sidewalk outside the Greyhound station, pulled a clean dish towel from her grocery bag, and wrapped it around the old man's torn knuckles. He'd fallen trying to catch a trash bag that had blown loose in the wind, and nobody else on that block had even slowed down. Her daughter, Maya, stood close behind her, holding the strap of her backpack with both hands, watching the blood seep through the cotton. "It's nothing, miss," the man said, but his voice shook more than his hands did. "I'll be all right." He wasn't all right, not even close, but he didn't argue when Yolanda helped him to his feet and walked him to the bench under the bus shelter, because something about her steadiness made arguing feel pointless. The towel she wrapped around his hand cost $3 at the dollar store, bought in a six-pack for her cleaning job. The man wearing it now controlled the largest dialysis and transplant network in the state of Ohio, and in 60 hours, Maya's name would move to the top of a kidney transplant list that had no room left for people like them. The man's name was Harold Whitfield Sr., though nobody on that sidewalk would have guessed it. 2 hours earlier, he'd been sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 19th floor of Whitfield Renal Institute, the hospital system he'd spent 4 decades building out of one storefront clinic in Cleveland's Huff neighborhood. He'd started it after his younger brother died waiting for a kidney that never came, back when Harold was 26 and broke and furious at a system that let good men die on lists. He swore that day that no one under his roof would die waiting if he could help it. Whitfield Renal grew into 9 facilities across 3 counties, $410 million in assets, and Harold had given every year of his life to it. But that evening, the board wanted to merge with Apex Health Partners, a national chain headquartered in Dallas, and the man pushing hardest for the deal was Harold's own son. "Dad, the math doesn't lie," Russell Whitfield had said, leaning over the table with his tablet angled toward his father like a weapon. "Apex is offering 4 times our current valuation. The shareholders will eat us alive if we walk away from this." Russell was 44, a nephrologist himself, top of his class at Case Western. And somewhere along the way, he'd stopped seeing the people on his operating table and started seeing the spreadsheets underneath them. "This institute was built to save lives, Russell, not get auctioned off. Healthcare doesn't run on sentiment anymore, Dad. It runs on margins." Nobody at that table spoke up for Harold, not one of the 11 board members. He stood, looked around at faces he'd trusted for 30 years, and said quietly, "This place is not for sale while I'm breathing," and walked out without his driver, without his coat, into the cold March wind coming off Lake Erie. He walked for almost 2 miles, past the boarded storefronts on Euclid Avenue, past a check-cashing place with bars on the windows, until his legs gave out near a bus shelter, and he sat down on the bench, breathing hard, his $600 wool coat soaked through with sweat and rain. To anyone passing, he looked like just another tired old man who'd had a long day. That's exactly what Yolanda Pierce saw when the trash bag went flying, and he reached for it and fell. Before any of that, you'd need to understand who Yolanda Pierce was, because helping that man up off the concrete wasn't a one-time act of kindness. It was just who she'd always been. Yolanda was 38 years old. She cleaned offices downtown from 5 in the morning until noon, then picked up shifts at a laundromat on the east side, folding other people's clothes until 8 at night. She and her daughter Maya lived in a 2-bedroom rental on Kinsman Road that smelled like the bleach Yolanda used to scrub it twice a week, because clean was one of the only things she could control. Maya was 11, sharp-tongued and funny, the kind of kid who corrected your grammar and then laughed at her own joke. She also had stage 4 kidney failure, diagnosed when she was 8 after a strep infection that turned into something that never fully went away. Dialysis 3 times a week kept her alive. A transplant was the only thing that would actually save her, and Maya had been on the regional waiting list for 11 months with no donor match and a body that was getting tired of waiting. The waitlist coordinator had explained it to Yolanda in a small beige office that smelled like burnt coffee. Without a matching living donor, Maya's average wait time is 2 to 4 years, Miss Pierce. Her blood type and antibody profile make her what we call a hard match. 2 to 4 years. Maya didn't have 4 years. Her color had started changing. That grayish undertone that crept into her skin when the dialysis wasn't keeping up, and her energy at school had dropped to almost nothing. She used to run track. Now she sat on the bleachers and watched, telling everyone she just liked to cheer. The night of the bus shelter, Yolanda had picked Maya up from her grandmother's house in Glenville, the way she did every evening after work, and they were walking the last 4 blocks home when the wind kicked up, and an old man across the street stumbled chasing a piece of trash that wasn't even his. Maya was the one who noticed first. "Mama, he fell. Look, he's bleeding." She tugged her mother's sleeve, and Yolanda didn't hesitate, because hesitating had never been in her nature, not when somebody needed help and she had 2 working hands. She knelt down on that sidewalk in her work scrubs with a dollar store towel and wrapped a stranger's bleeding hand like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "You should get that looked at properly, sir," Yolanda said, helping him sit. "Is there someone I can call for you?" Harold shook his head, embarrassed in a way he hadn't felt since he was a young man with nothing. "No, miss. I just need a minute." He looked at Maya, who was watching him with open, unguarded curiosity, and he noticed the same thing he'd trained himself to notice in patients for 40 years. The puffiness under her eyes, the faint yellow-gray tint to her skin that most people walked right past. He'd built an entire institute around recognizing exactly that look. "How old is your daughter?" he asked quietly. 11, Yolanda said, a little surprised by the question. "She's tougher than she looks." "I believe that," Harold said, and meant it more than Yolanda could have known. A bus rumbled toward the stop. Yolanda helped Harold steady himself on the bench, told him there was a clinic 2 blocks down if the bleeding didn't stop, and then she and Maya boarded the bus and were gone. Swallowed up by the evening traffic, Harold sat there with a dollar store towel wrapped around his hand, and for the first time since walking out of that boardroom, something in his chest loosened. He thought about that little girl's eyes, sharp and alive, despite everything her body was clearly fighting. He thought about a mother who knelt down in the street for a stranger without asking a single question about who he was or what was in it for her. He pulled out his phone and called the one person at Whitfield Renal he trusted without reservation. Odessa Banks. No, that name was already used. He called her Pauline Ashworth, who had run his transplant coordination office for 22 years, since before the institute had its own surgical wing. "Pauline, it's Harold. I need you to look into something for me. A girl, 11 years old. Her mother's name is Yolanda. I think they might be in our system, maybe under the regional list." Pauline was quiet a moment. "This about whatever happened to you tonight? You sound different. Just look into it, please." An hour later, Pauline called back, and what she told him made Harold grip the edge of his desk hard enough to feel it in his teeth the next morning. Maya Pierce, 11, stage 4 renal failure, on the regional transplant list for 11 months, no living donor match identified, antibody profile complicating cadaveric matches. Her mother applied for our institute's expedited evaluation program back in the fall, Pauline said. It got flagged. Flagged why? Insurance gap. Medicaid covers dialysis, but the pre-transplant workup and evaluation testing required an upfront deposit the family couldn't make. Standard intake protocol. Standard protocol. Harold repeated, and the words tasted like metal. "Harold, listen. This isn't a woman trying to game the system. She's worked 2 jobs the whole time her daughter's been sick. She's called our office 6 times in 4 months asking about payment plans. Every time, same answer." Harold sat in silence so long Pauline asked if he was still there. "I'm here," he said. "That girl is getting evaluated." Today. That afternoon, Harold called Russell into his private office, not the boardroom. Russell arrived, still in his white coat, stethoscope looped around his neck, the picture of a man who'd built his whole identity around precision and control. "If an 11-year-old girl needs a transplant evaluation and her family can't make the deposit, what's our policy?" Harold asked. "Depends on the case specifics." If Medicaid doesn't cover full workup costs, we refer to the state assistance pathway. That pathway has a 4-month backlog, Russell. This girl doesn't have 4 months left in her the way her labs are trending. Dad, we can't fast-track every hardship case that crosses our desk. The board's already scrutinizing our charity care ratio this quarter. Then scrutinize it after we save a child. That's not strategy. That's emotion. Harold looked at his son and saw, for one disorienting second, his own younger self, 30 years younger, telling an accountant that the numbers had to work first, that the mission could catch up later. He'd built a machine that ran exactly as designed. Efficient, profitable, and increasingly hollow. When you were 13, Harold said quietly, you told me you wanted to be a doctor because you wanted to fix what nobody else would touch. Do you remember saying that? Russell's jaw tightened. He said nothing. What happened to that? That was a kid talking. The real world has overhead, Dad. The real world also has an 11-year-old girl named Maya, whose mother gave a stranger her last clean towel on a sidewalk 3 nights ago. That stranger was me. Russell's face shifted, just barely. You're telling me this because you want me on her case. I'm telling you because I think you've forgotten who you became a doctor to be. I'm not ordering you to do anything. Russell stood, walked to the door, and paused with his hand on the frame. What's her file number? He asked without turning around. The next morning at 6:15, Russell told himself he was only going to glance at the chart, check the labs, see if the case was even viable before getting emotionally involved in something his father had clearly orchestrated. He pulled up Maya Pierce's records. Stage 4 chronic kidney disease, declining GFR, worsening anemia, antibody sensitization complicating donor matching. He studied the numbers for 20 minutes, running scenarios in his head the way he always did, the puzzle of it pulling him in despite himself. Then he made the mistake of walking past her room on his way to the lab. Maya was sitting up in bed with a coloring book, an IV line, taped to the back of one thin hand, her grandmother dozing in the chair beside her, because Yolanda had a morning shift she couldn't afford to miss. Maya looked up and grinned at him like he was the most interesting thing to happen all day. Are you a doctor? You've got the coat. I am, Russell said, surprised into honesty. Can you fix my kidneys? They're broken. Not like dramatic broken, just broken. Something in Russell's chest cracked a little, the way ice does before it actually breaks. He pulled up a chair. What are you drawing? Maya held up a sketch of a woman in a superhero cape hovering over a tiny stick figure city. That's my mom. She doesn't fly or anything. She just always shows up. I figure that's basically a superpower. Russell looked at the drawing, then at the sleeping grandmother, then back at Maya's tired, yellow-shadowed eyes and her unbothered grin, and something that had been locked down inside him for years came loose. He stayed for 20 minutes, listening to her explain, in exhaustive detail, the entire plot of a cartoon about a raccoon detective. Then he went and found Yolanda on her lunch break, waiting tables now too because the laundromat had cut her hours, standing outside the hospital cafeteria in her cleaning scrubs, eating a granola bar standing up because she didn't have time to sit. Miss Pierce. I'm Dr. Whitfield. I reviewed Maya's case. Yolanda's whole body went rigid, the way it did every time a doctor said her daughter's name in that particular tone. If this is about the deposit, I'm still working on it. I'm not here about money, Russell said. I'm here to ask if you'll let me fast-track her workup. No deposit. We start this week. Yolanda's face moved through disbelief, suspicion, and something close to fear, all before any hope was allowed to land. Why would you do that? Russell thought about his father's voice the night before, about a 13-year-old version of himself who didn't know yet what overhead meant. Because somebody reminded me why I went into this, he said. Yolanda's eyes filled before she could stop them. Thank you, she whispered. You don't know what this means. I think I do, Russell said, and for once, he believed it. The workup moved fast after that. Blood work, imaging. A living donor outreach campaign Pauline's office launched quietly through Yolanda's church and Maya's school. 3 weeks in, a partial match surfaced. Not a perfect one, but workable with the new desensitization protocol Whitfield-Renal had only just begun offering, a protocol that happened to be Russell's specialty. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 8 hours, Russell at the head of the team. Yolanda spent the night before in a plastic chair beside Maya's bed, counting her daughter's breaths the way she'd done for 3 years. Except this time, for the first time, she let herself believe it might be the last time she had to count them out of fear. At 5:50, the nurses came to prep Maya. "When I wake up, will it work?" Maya asked, suddenly small under the hospital lights. "It's going to work, baby," Yolanda said, holding her daughter's face in both hands. "And you're going to run track again. For real this time, not just cheering from the bleachers." Maya managed a grin. "Faster than destiny?" "Faster than destiny." The doors to the surgical wing swallowed her at 6:10, and Yolanda stood there with her hand still raised in the empty hallway long after there was nothing left to wave at. The waiting room had the particular silence of every hospital waiting room. A muted television, a vending machine humming, a clock that seemed to move backward. Maya's grandmother brought a crossword puzzle she never opened. Pauline sat with them for 2 hours before her shift started, bringing coffee neither woman could drink. 2 floors up, in an office with a view of Lake Erie, Harold Whitfield watched the security feed of that waiting room and, for the first time in longer than he could remember, let himself cry. Not for the Institute, not for the board, but for a mother who'd handed a stranger her last clean towel and a girl who drew superheroes without capes. At 2:40 in the afternoon, the surgical doors opened. Russell walked out still in scrubs, mask hanging loose, eyes tired but clear. "Miss Pierce." The transplant took. "Her new kidney is already producing urine on the table, which is the best sign we could ask for. Maya did great." Yolanda's knees gave before the sentence finished. Her mother caught her, and the 2 women held each other in the middle of that beige waiting room, sobbing, while a nurse passing in the hallway stopped and pressed a hand to her own chest. Yolanda found Russell's hand and held it in both of hers. "Thank you for giving her a chance." "She gave me one too," Russell said quietly. "I forgot what this job was supposed to feel like." 3 days later, Maya was sitting up eating orange Jell-O and complaining loudly that hospital pudding cups were a war crime. Her color had changed. Not gray anymore, but a real ordinary pink-brown, the color of a kid who was simply a kid again. That afternoon, a nurse told Yolanda someone wanted to meet her, a benefactor who'd quietly covered the cost of Maya's evaluation and surgery beyond what insurance touched. Yolanda frowned, confused, and took the elevator to a small conference room on the 4th floor, where a man in a gray suit stood when she walked in. She recognized him instantly. The bleeding hands, the dollar store towel, the bus shelter on Euclid. "You," she said. "You're the man from the bus stop." "Yes," Harold said, "and I owe you an explanation and an apology." He told her everything. The boardroom, the walk in the rain, the recognition he'd felt looking at Maya's eyes, the institute that had turned her family away over a deposit it could have written off without noticing. Yolanda listened, arms crossed, jaw tight, until he finished. Then she asked the question that had been sitting in her chest since the diagnosis. "What about the next mother, Mr. Whitfield? The one who doesn't happen to hand a towel to a billionaire on the right sidewalk at the right time. What happens to her?" Harold had no quick answer, because she was right, and they both knew it. 1 week later, he called an emergency board meeting. Russell sat at his right side for the first time in years on the same side of an argument. Harold stood without notes. 40 years ago, I built this institute because my brother died waiting on a list while this city had the money to save him and didn't spend it. I made a promise on opening day that no family would be turned away here. 3 weeks ago, an 11-year-old girl almost lost her spot on a transplant pathway because her mother couldn't make a 4-figure deposit. That's not a policy failure. That's a promise I broke. He announced the creation of the Pierce Access Fund, covering full pre-transplant evaluation and donor matching costs for any pediatric patient regardless of insurance status, funded by reallocating 12% of annual surplus. A board member objected about shareholder expectations. Then I'll buy out every share myself, Harold said, and take this institute fully nonprofit. My lawyers have the paperwork ready. The vote passed, narrowly, but it passed. Russell stood and committed to 2 pro bono pediatric cases a month and a mentorship track for young nephrologists, built around exactly the lesson Maya had handed him for free. Afterward, Harold offered Yolanda a position as a patient navigator, helping families move through the system the way no one had helped her. I clean offices, Mr. Whitfield. I'm not a social worker. You're a mother who fought this entire system for 3 years and won. There's no degree that teaches that. Yolanda thought about every locked door, every beige office, every form she'd filled out at midnight after Maya was asleep. I'll do it, she said, not for the money. Because nobody should sit in that waiting room as alone as I did. A year later, Maya Pierce was 12 years old and running the 400 at a regional track meet. Arms pumping, ponytail flying, color high and healthy in her cheeks. Beating Destiny Calloway by half a length and throwing both hands in the air before she'd even crossed fully through the tape. Across town, Yolanda stood in a hallway of Whitfield Renal Institute, wearing a navy blazer and a badge that read Patient Navigator, kneeling down in front of a young father, gripping a stack of bills and a transplant referral letter, his hands shaking the exact way hers used to. I know exactly how this feels, she told him. You are not walking through this alone, not on my watch. In its first year, the Pierce Access Fund had covered full evaluation and donor matching costs for 31 children who would otherwise have waited, or worse. Russell had dinner with his father every Sunday now. They didn't agree on everything, but they always showed up, and that, Harold had learned, was most of what mattered. That evening, Yolanda came home to the small rented house with the yard Maya had been begging for since she was 8, and Maya barreled into her legs at full speed, smelling like sweat and cut grass and the orange popsicle she'd clearly had for an after-school snack. I beat Destiny by a lot, she announced. I saw the meet results. I'm so proud of you, baby. Maya ran off toward her room to finish a drawing, and as Yolanda hung up her coat by the door, her eyes landed on the frame above the couch. A colored pencil drawing of a woman in a cape with no superpowers except always showing up, a tiny city below her, and underneath, in careful 12-year-old handwriting, my mom. She doesn't fly. She just never stops coming. Yolanda stood there a long moment, thinking about a torn dish towel, a stranger bleeding on a sidewalk, and a system that had finally given something back. From down the hall, Maya called out, Mama, come see. I drew us at the new house, with a dog we don't have yet. Yolanda wiped her eyes, smiled, and went to find her daughter.